Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. Time to see then what is making the headlines with the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha, and the Daily Telegraph's chief political correspondent, Christopher Hope. And they'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So, as ever, let's start with the front pages. The eye splashing with the Prime Minister's ambition that everyone eligible for a COVID booster vaccine should receive one by the end of January. That's also the lead for The Times. And the Metro has word that the Army are being drafted in to help give jabs to fend off the Omicron variant. The Daily Telegraph understands that restrictions put into place by the government today will last until March next year. They will be reviewed, though, every 3 weeks. Boris Johnson has contradicted his leading scientists by telling people they can party at Christmas, reports The Guardian. The Daily Mail, also with that, PM, don't cancel your Christmas. The Financial Times has the latest on the US Federal Reserve's asset purchase programme. And The Sun leading with a story about a car crash reported to involve the actress Sheridan Smith. So let's go straight to Sonia Sodha and Christopher Hope. Christopher, to you first of all, and the Daily Telegraph front page. New COVID restrictions to last until March next year. Forgetting to mention instantly, I suppose, the review every 3 weeks. But what was the mood in the Commons today as they voted this through?
Well, it's like deja vu all over again, Anna. When you've got concern amongst Tory MPs, there's not a lot of trust there about when these powers are required until. The small print, Lucy Fisher reports in tomorrow's Telegraph, says they can keep going until March. I mean, that's 6 months. I know of some Tory MPs who refused to go for drinks tonight with Boris Johnson as a protest over these powers. The row about the pandemic, I mean, crumbs, we're back to where we were about a year ago, a row between mainly the Tory right, the freedom lovers on the right wing of the Tory party against scientists, with Boris Johnson in the middle. I mean, nothing has changed really, sadly, and COVID keeps sweeping across the country. The difference, of course, for these people concerned about the so-called pandemic is that there's a lot fewer people being put into hospital, and that's a blessing, I suppose, from Omicron so far.
Yeah, I mean, this once again causes divisions, does it not? If we take a look at the Guardian, Sonia, I mean, for many people, having to have a PCR test when you come back from travel, face masks in certain settings, doesn't go nearly far enough given the number of cases we have. And it does, for some, though, feel like it's the tip of the iceberg as we roll into Christmas and through winter, which brings us to this clash between Jenny Harries and Downing Street over this idea of limiting your socialising, presumably so you can see your old folks at Christmas. What did you make of it all?
Well, I do wonder if too much is being made of a supposed difference between Boris Johnson and Jenny Harries. It's true that they gave off different signals. So Jenny Harries, in the press conference, did say, I think it's sort of common sense, really. I mean, there's no formal restrictions on socialising. But she did say, it may be sensible not to do as much, to think about what sort of socialising is necessary. She didn't tell us not to go out and socialise. It's not inconsistent with doing things in the run-up to Christmas. And indeed, some scientists are saying it's just about being sensible and there's no requirement on people to do it. But to be honest, I think quite often the public, in fact, at every stage of this pandemic, the public have been ahead of the government on this. So the public has often started to take action before the government has mandated it. And I've heard of lots of instances of, companies perhaps thinking about Christmas parties, etc. Maybe people thinking, well, I've got 4 Christmas parties coming up in the next couple of weeks. I could miss these 2, but I'm going to go to these 2 because I'm seeing my elderly parents and I want to minimise the risk. I mean, at this point in time, it's really up to individual choice. And I sort of think what Jenny Harries said was common sense, and people they want to, but they don't have to. I do think that perhaps there's been, it is clear that Boris Johnson doesn't want to give out that signal, and there's definitely a perceived contradiction there when he was he was saying today there's no reason to cancel anything. But I sort of think you can there's an element of consistency. You don't have to cancel it, but also be sensible and think about what you really need and want to do, particularly if you're seeing older relatives.
Yeah, I can see you've got Christmas lights up, unless they're the all-year-round type. It felt Christmassy outside Downing Street today as well. What did you say? I apologise, I talked all over you.
Oh, I was just saying, I was one of those people who put their Christmas tree up really early. I did it a whole week ago. I just thought,
It's
we need a
November.
bit of light in our lives.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, Christopher, feeling pretty Christmassy at Downing Street too. Was this the event you were talking about for those who protested and did not turn up, or was this something different? We know Boris Johnson takes Christmas really seriously. He did last year. He kept trying to keep hold of this idea of a family celebration. So why slap down, as many people reported today, or contradict Jenny Harries, who to some made a perfectly sensible suggestion that just keep an eye on what you're doing? This is a crowd disease, after all.
It's the old debate, isn't it, about politicians trying to push for greater individual freedom, a bit like what Sonia was arguing for there, I thought, against what scientists are arguing. And there's a feeling that there's a degree of wanting, certainly through the past 18 months in crumbs, that we're a bit tired of this argument of scientists and medical experts trying to clamp down on individual freedoms. I think Sonia's right. I think you should be down for what you feel comfortable with. If you feel you can't go to 4 parties, just go to 2 and look after yourself, and be careful if you're seeing an elderly relative. All that makes sense. I think that's where the politics should be. The problem is with this big, we start writing about doves and hawks in the cabinet, who's in favour of lockdown, who isn't. It's so tedious. I really hope that, I think, as Sonia says, I hope we have all moved on a bit. We've learned a lot more about COVID, about ourselves as a nation, and we can be trusted more to get it right. And that means taking care, wearing a mask, because a mask means that you're thinking of somebody else, and that's how we should be at Christmas.
And in the meantime, of course, more details of how they're going to get this enormous booster jab programme out to everybody. The Eye is going for this, and they've set a deadline as well. This ambition of giving every adult their booster by the end of January. So once again, setting great stall by the vaccine programme, Sonia.
That's right. And I think everyone would agree that vaccines are the first line of defence against Omicron, this new variant. I think it's really important to say we don't know how serious Omicron is yet. It might turn out to be okay and not that much worse than Delta. It may turn out to be more virulent and more infectious. And one of the reasons why the government's put in these measures is because it wants to take time over the next 3 weeks to figure out exactly what we're looking at. But vaccines are the first line of defence. They may not be the only line of defence that we need in the end, but they are absolutely the first line of defence. And so that's why the government, I think quite rightly, has put a lot of emphasis on ramping up the booster programme over the next 2 months. There was a little bit of, I wasn't 100% clear, because Boris Johnson's referenced everyone having the chance to have a booster by the end of January. An official said that everyone would have the chance to book a booster by the end of January. Two are slightly different, but the sentiment is very much there. The papers are reporting tomorrow that means stepping up from 2.5 million vaccines a week to 3.5 million vaccines. So that's a huge thing that the NHS and community pharmacies have to deliver just at the time when the NHS is in a real winter crunch, really struggling for capacity. There's huge staff shortages across the service. So it is going to be a really big challenge in the NHS. But everything that I've heard from organisations like the NHS Confederation, it sounds like the NHS, with the help of the army, are going to be pulling out all the stops to make booster jabs happen.
Yeah.
The poor old army, though.
Yeah, once again, being involved. 400, I mean, it's not huge numbers, to be fair, but we know they're great at logistics. Will that make a difference?
Well, it might do. I mean, the army were dragged out from the barracks to drive lorries in the great petrol shortage that happened in, around the late September, early October. They're becoming this kind of reserve force which steps in at any point. So I wonder whether they use a bit of cover by politicians to show they are properly getting to grips with it. I mean, the army's been called in. How bad can it be? So I was a degree of that, I think. But I mean, why not? It's a big push to make Christmas happen. So why not?
Yeah, and in terms of the throwing everything at it booster programme, Sonia, some people might say, why were we so hesitant in the first place? I mean, older people will have died because they didn't get their booster early enough in the autumn. The evidence from Israel was already there. We had a slow start to that, and indeed to the vaccination of children too.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I was listening to an interview with a member of JCVI yesterday, and they said, the hindsight is a fine thing, and with the benefit of hindsight, they personally wished or personally thought it would have been better to get the booster program running more quickly. But things changed so quickly in the pandemic, and I suppose what he was saying was that back in the summer when they were taking all these decisions, we didn't have very high infection rates. We didn't even really have Delta significantly on the scene yet. So a lot has changed. And I guess it just shows how much you sort of need to plan for the worst in this pandemic. But yeah, I think with hindsight, lots of people would say, well, it would have been better to get it off more quickly. And I think it's really interesting because JCVI, the independent committee that advised the government and make recommendations on sort of immunisation programmes, they really got it right on the gap between first and second doses, and they attracted all sorts of criticism from all sorts of quarters, and they've been proved right on that. But their decisions on children have been very slow, and they've come in for a lot of criticism in that. So I think it's interesting that they did sort of seem to take quite a slow decision on extending to children.
And Christopher, just one thought about the Conservative position on this, returning to where we started, the Daily Telegraph, quoting the same old voices, to be fair, Craig McKinley, who said regulations could deter people from going to a Christmas party or the pub for fear of getting pinged before Christmas Day and having to miss out on seeing family and friends. Steve Baker criticising ministers for taking away the public's right to choose what they do based on evidence that he claimed was flimsy and uncertain. What is the politics behind that view, and are they allowed a voice in the era of Downing Street?
Well, this is a small cohort of around 36 Tory MPs. They're battle-hardened, and they fought these fights a year ago, didn't they? And they just not a lot of trust, I think, with number 10 and these many right-wing Tory MPs, and that's the problem. It's not going to mean that we have any rebellions because the other parties are broadly in favour of these restrictions, but it just shows a degree of disaffection with number 10. And don't forget, we're looking into a big by-election on Thursday in Old Bexley and Sidcup, and then 2 weeks hence in North Shropshire, which I know the Tories are more worried about, with a strong Lib Dem showing there. So, the politics never ends. But I think, even looking at the headline there in the Eye, which is hardly friendly to Boris Johnson, he'll be pretty pleased tonight. That kind of works, that works. It looks like he's taking action, being decisive. And number 10 during a pandemic, there's little more he can be.
OK, interesting. Go on, yep, shoot, go for it.
Yeah. I was just going to say one thing that I would come in on the pandemic, as I think it's really easy to blow those concerns out of proportion, actually, because it's important to remember we've only got 22 confirmed cases of Omicron at the moment, and you only have to self-isolate if you come into contact with someone with Omicron, not other variants of COVID, which Delta is a dominant. And I suspect that in 3 weeks we will know actually if Omicron is a lot worse and it's becoming dominant, in which case I think we could see those self-isolation guidelines expanded, or actually if we don't need to worry about it, in which case I think we'll see them right back. So I don't think this is going to lead to a specific Omicron-specific pandemic. Let's put it like that.
Right. I mean, 3 weeks is December the 20th, Sonia. So it's going to be tricky to focus on it all then, isn't it?
And Sonia, Daily Telegraph on its front page, as well as the COVID restrictions, once again reflects on some of the knock-on impact of this, with these startling and scary figures about possible cancer cases that have been missed.
That's right. So up to 740,000, 740. Yeah, 1,000. Sorry. Cases, according to the Telegraph there. And I think this refers to two things that have really emerged in recent months. So first is misdiagnosis, which is what this article is about. So people who may not necessarily have got the referrals they need, or maybe even just stayed away from the GP when they had sort of worrying symptoms. And so cases that were actually missed. And then secondly, we know that waiting lists for treatment have grown hugely and are at record levels. yours. And I mean, I just think it's really dreadful for people. And the NHS has been so overburdened with the pandemic that it hasn't possibly been able to treat people suffering from COVID very acutely and keep up with everything else that it would normally be doing. And, even going into this pandemic, the NHS was really, really very, very low on excess capacity, thanks to an incredibly tight funding settlement over the last 10 years. So I do think this is really troubling. And I think it's a reminder, actually, going forward, we are suffering very sadly still quite high numbers of deaths from COVID, although a lot lower than we were at the pandemic peak. But it's not even just about minimising the number of deaths in this, when we take measures. It's about protecting the NHS from getting dangerously overburdened. And so that will be a big, if we see restrictions come in as a result of Omicron, protecting the NHS and ensuring that people can, for example, still get cancer treatment will be a big part of why.
Go for it.
Well, I was, yes to all that, but I think this plays into this debate about why you can't see your own GP. And my mum told me that the only GP she can see is on the TV when there's some drama. I mean, she can't get to see any GPs anymore, and you can't see one. I mean, and that's the point. When you see a GP, possibly they may pick up on issues of early stage cancer. In this article here, Dr. Gary Howson, the vice chairman of the Royal College of GPs, he makes clear that GPs take their responsibility very seriously and worked hard throughout the pandemic. And of course, we must always protect the NHS, but equally there's a balance here. I think a lot of people know, or I know someone certainly whose mother died because her cancer was not picked up soon enough. And I think there's lots of cases like that out there, and that's what the National Office Report is showing.
Yeah, but that's the danger of having cases run so hot. I mean, COVID cases, allowing them to be in their tens of thousands every day, that's the knock-on impact. You've got to keep doctors safe, isn't it? You've got 20 seconds on the last story, which is anti-migrant rage at lifeboat heroes. This is the Metro and other papers, in fact, as well, Sonia.
Oh, this is just a dreadful story. So RNLI were about to send out a lifeboat to do a rescue at sea of people seeking refuge, made the very dangerous crossing across the channel. And some people physically tried to stop them by sort of standing in front of the boat as it launched. So I just think really dreadfully sad story.